Have you ever been looking for love only to find yourself isolated and alone? Then, in desperation, start looking for love in all the wrong places. Start looking for love in, as one song said, in all the wrong faces. One of the things that can happen when we feel alone and when we feel isolated is we can make ourselves vulnerable to very negative things in our life. We can put ourselves into bad relationships. We can put ourselves into bad habits, all because we're looking for love, we don't find it, and then we end up feeling isolated and alone. If you're like I was when I was most of your age, at night when I felt alone and when I felt isolated, I listened to music. And I had my music to make me feel better. But music only lasts as long as you play it or are playing it in your head. Eventually, we have to go back to high school, we have to go back to college, and we have to live in an area where we may feel alone and isolated. And we're living in a world and a country where most of us don't want to admit we feel alone or we feel isolated. Now, I was reading one of my favorite writers, David French, the other day, and he wrote an article called "A Crucial Court Case Exposes the Darkness of America's Worst Industry." And I want to put this before you as a way to see how unloving the world is. I've edited it way down, of course. The case is called Serena Flatis versus MindGeek. Flatis sued MindGeek, the company that owns Pornhub.com. Now, Pornhub.com has 3.5 billion visits a month as of 2019. There are very few sites that are doing as well as Pornhub.com. Maybe you're a subscriber. And she sued Visa, the company that enables Pornhub to monetize its content. Flatis' story is horrifying. As recounted by the court, when she was 13 years old, her boyfriend pressured her into making a nude video. Now, this happens. Girls and guys get on their phones or on their iPads and they snap photos, and sometimes they convince each other to take off their clothes, etc. Her boyfriend pressured her into making a nude video. Without her knowledge or consent, he uploaded it to Pornhub, where it was posted under the title, 13-year-old brunette shows off for the camera. MindGeek hosts videos, but they also allow other sites to take that video and use it. So MindGeek hosted the video, transferred that same video to other sites, and it was downloaded and re-uploaded multiple times, and one of the re-uploads garnered 2.7 million views. When this young lady showed up at her school, she was bullied, and she was ridiculed because guys had been watching her on Pornhub. You say, well, what does that have to do with living in an unloving world? In a loving world, your boyfriend doesn't pressure you to take naked videos at all. And he certainly doesn't pressure you to take naked videos and post them to Pornhub.com. But that's the world we live in. And for many of us who are churchgoers, we so live in our own bubble, we don't pay attention to what's going on. You go on further and read the article, and the reason Visa's being sued is because Visa actually said, we're not going to support you anymore, Pornhub, unless you take down all of these child pornography videos. And for a while, they took them down. Visa started working with them again, and they put them all back up, and that's why they're being sued. Visa was trying to have the case thrown out, and the judge said, you can't throw it out. You have definitely enabled Pornhub to do this. The world we live in is a world where people will get us to do things and betray us. And we need to understand that. And for many of us who've grown up in church, we think the world is interesting because we're naive about how destructive it is. And that's why we ask the question, why can't the world teach us to love? Why can't the world teach us to love? We can't be fooled. Without God, the world is unloving. Now, there are many people who will say God has caused problems and you shouldn't go to church and religion is bad. I get it. But what we have to understand is that just because God is used in a negative way by individuals doesn't make God bad and doesn't make church bad. And those of us who believe have to be willing to stand up and say, instead of battling each other and fighting each other, we are the people who need to make God attractive, make church attractive, and help people figure out when you find God and when you find church and it's legit and it's true, then you're going to experience love. And that's why we all have to work at being loving. And that, for me, when I became a Christian, was not at all what I was good at. I didn't really believe in love. I thought ambition works, money works, achievement works. Love doesn't work because I had felt rejected in my life. And if you're like me, when you get rejected and you get hurt, you start to have a less positive view of love and you get more afraid. But without God, the world is unloving. Romans 1:28. People did not think it was important to have a true knowledge of God. So God left them and allowed them to have their own worthless thinking, and so they do what they should not do. People ask the question, if God is so good, why does he allow the world to be as bad as it can be? The answer is simple. God gives us free choice, and just like it says here, people didn't want to think about God, and they didn't value God, so God let them do what they wanted to do. If you've looked at the world and said, why is it so terrible? It's because when people won't think about God, when they won't make God a priority, and they won't talk about God, then God is going to say, okay, you will get what you want now. And if you look around the world, you ask yourself the question, is this the world I want to live in? If it's not, more than likely it's because the world is out there without God, and when it's without God, it's unloving. Romans 1 goes on. In verse 29, they are filled. It's talking about people who have no desire to have any knowledge of God, don't want to value God, don't want to think about God, don't want to talk about God, don't want to see a scripture read, don't want to see a scripture posted, don't want to hear anything about spirituality. They think it's bad. Get it out of society. Get it out of the public. If you want to do that junk, you do that in your house. Well, guess what? When you push God out of society, this is what happens. They are filled with every kind of sin, evil, greed, and hatred. They are full of jealousy, murder, fighting, lying, and thinking the worst things about each other. They gossip and say evil things about each other. They hate God. They are rude, proud, and brag about themselves. They invent ways of doing evil, and they don't obey their parents. They are foolish, they don't keep their promises, and they show no kindness or mercy to others. What the Bible teaches us is this. What God is telling us is this. When you see the world being unloving, you've got to understand that's because God is not involved. And rather than railing against churches or individuals who don't live the life perfectly, which none of us do, you look at the Bible and you say, what is the Bible actually teaching, and does it work? And it does work. The only time the Bible doesn't work is when people don't obey it. If people obey it, the Bible works. You're sitting there going, well, I haven't seen it work. I'll guarantee you haven't obeyed it. It's that simple. When it doesn't work in my life, it's simple. I'm not doing it. It's like following instructions. If you don't follow the instructions, that little recipe you were cooking up is going to come out somewhat different than you expected. Those cookies are going to be oblong rather than round. That cake is going to be hard rather than soft and tasty with that good frosting. Have you ever had a bad pizza? That's because the people making the pizza didn't do a good job. You don't say all pizza's bad. You say, I will never eat pizza at that place again. That's how you do. You get a bad burger. You go, I'm not going to eat a burger at that place and pay $8 again. I'm going over here. So you don't blame all burgers for a bad burger. You say, that's a bad burger, not all burgers are bad, and judging by the look on your faces, you agree with me. You're all in on the burger, the fries, and the cake, preferably yellow cake with chocolate frosting. What God tells us is this: when we don't follow the instructions, we're going to get something negative. That young lady who was taken advantage of was taken advantage of because we live in a world where a guy has no conscience because he's not living according to the Bible, and therefore he feels no problem at all with destroying a girl's life. That girl not only was bullied and ridiculed, she ended up having severe mental health problems because of what was done to her. All because some guy was able to pressure her and convince her. Now, here's the bad thing. Later on, another guy pressured her into doing it again. Well, when you're 13 or 14 years old, you're going to be vulnerable to that. Here's the question we all have to ask. Is that the kind of world we want to live in? Is that the kind of world you want to have? Is that what you want for your children's future? Is that what you want? If you want that, then don't believe in God, don't read the Bible, don't live by the Bible. If you think the Bible is a burden, well, I got to do all that stuff and it's hard. Okay, you can do all that stuff and do the hard stuff, or you can have a world where 13-year-olds end up on Pornhub and have their life destroyed. And it's happening far more than any of us in this room understand. And by the way, one of the things David French says, if you happen to be somebody who subscribes to Pornhub or uses it, maybe this will help you understand what you are personally doing to people. Those are his words.